In 2007, two guys in San Francisco couldn't pay rent, so they bought 3 air mattresses, put them on their living room floor, and charged strangers $80 a night to sleep on them. That idea is now worth more than $100 billion. This is not a story about a genius idea. The idea was actually kind of terrible. This is a story about two people who refused to give up and accidentally changed how the world travels. But before we get to the $100 billion, we need to go back to a cramped apartment, a maxed-out credit card, and a design conference that nobody expected to change the world. Brian Chesky grew up in Niskayuna, New York, a quiet suburban town where not much happened. He was a competitive wrestler, an obsessive worker, and someone who never quite felt like he fit the path everyone expected him to follow. He got into the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the best design schools in the world. His parents wanted him to be a teacher. He wanted to build something. Joe Gebbia was already there, a fellow design student with a different kind of brain, one that saw problems as opportunities and spaces as experiences waiting to happen. They became close friends. Both graduated with design degrees and the same uncomfortable question: what do you actually do with this? 2007, Brian moved to San Francisco with $40 in his bank account. Joe was already there, living in a nice apartment he could barely afford. Brian needed a place to stay. Joe needed help with rent. They became roommates, two designers in their mid-20s, both broke, both ambitious, both convinced they were going to build something. They just had no idea what. October 2007, a major design conference was coming to San Francisco. The Industrial Design Society of America, and every hotel in the city was completely sold out. Brian and Joe looked at each other. They looked at their apartment. They looked at the air mattresses in the storage cupboard. And one of them said, "What if we rent this place out?" They called it Airbed and Breakfast. They built a basic website in one night. 3 air mattresses, $80 each. Breakfast included, Brian would cook. 3 guests responded: a 35-year-old man from India, a 45-year-old woman from Utah, and a father from Boston. They came, they slept on air mattresses, they paid. It worked. Brian and Joe had an insight that almost nobody else had yet. Millions of people travel to cities where hotels are expensive. Millions of other people have spare rooms. What if you connected them? But this was 2008. The concept of staying in a stranger's home was genuinely frightening to most people. The trust problem seemed insurmountable. They rebuilt the website properly, added real photos, real profiles, real reviews. They were designing for trust, using every design tool they knew to make strangers feel safe with strangers. They launched properly in 2008, and almost immediately, nothing happened. A few bookings. Then silence. They had built something the world wasn't ready for yet. They were running out of money, credit cards maxed, friends and family starting to ask questions. The idea that felt so obvious to them was clearly not obvious to the world. They applied to Y Combinator, Silicon Valley's most prestigious startup accelerator. They got rejected. They applied again in 2009. And this time, they brought cereal. During the 2008 presidential election, they designed and sold limited edition political cereal boxes. Obama O's and Cap'n McCain's, $40 a box. They made $30,000 and kept the company alive. They took the idea to investors. 7 of the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley said no. Not maybe. Not later. No. One investor wrote in his notes, "People are not going to stay in strangers' homes. This is a dangerous and naive idea." He later said it was the worst investment decision he ever made. Another told them the market was too small. Another said the liability issues would kill them. Another said even if it worked in San Francisco, it would never scale globally. Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures passed. He later called it one of the biggest mistakes of his career. The company he could have invested in at a $2 million valuation eventually went public at $100 billion. Brian and Joe kept the rejection emails, every single one. They pinned them to the wall of their apartment. Not to feel sorry for themselves, but to remind themselves that the experts were wrong. This is the part of every great company's story that doesn't make it into the press releases. The months where the emails stop, where the money runs out, where you have to decide whether you actually believe in this thing. Brian later said, "I thought about quitting every single week, and every single week I came up with one more reason to keep going. The cereal boxes were one of those reasons." The cereal boxes did something unexpected. They didn't just raise money, they told a story about who Brian and Joe were. Resourceful, creative, relentless, willing to do whatever it took. Paul Graham at Y Combinator had seen the cereal boxes. He brought them in for an interview. The conversation did not go how Brian and Joe expected. Graham later said, "I funded them despite the idea, not because of it. The business model was crazy, but the founders, anyone who could sell cereal for $40 a box could sell anything." Y Combinator accepted them, $20,000 for 6% of the company. Brian and Joe moved into a house in Mountain View with 6 other YC founders and got to work. Graham gave them one instruction: go to New York. That's where your users are. Get on planes, knock on doors, meet your hosts in person, find out why the product isn't growing. They flew to New York, and they discovered the problem immediately. The photos on the listings were terrible, dark, blurry, uninviting. Nobody was booking because nobody could see what they were buying. So they rented a camera and spent a week going door to door, apartment to apartment, photographing every listing themselves. It was not scalable. It was not a tech solution. It worked immediately. Bookings in New York doubled within a week, then doubled again. The lesson: sometimes the solution to a tech problem isn't more tech, it's getting on a plane. They took the same approach city by city: London, Paris, Berlin, Barcelona. They didn't wait for hosts to find them. They went and found the hosts. Sequoia Capital, one of the firms that had passed, came back. They invested at a $240 million valuation, the same company they'd passed on at $2 million. By 2012, Airbnb had more rooms available than the largest hotel chains in the world. They hadn't built a single room. They hadn't hired a single housekeeper. The asset was other people's homes. The hotel industry started paying attention. Then they started getting nervous. Then they started lobbying governments to ban Airbnb. They had accidentally become the enemy of one of the most powerful industries on earth. Brian's response: "We're not trying to compete with hotels. We're trying to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere." The mission was bigger than the business. By 2019, Airbnb had 7 million listings in 190 countries. More than any hotel chain. More than most countries have hotel rooms. Built entirely on trust and a good review system. Then March 2020 happened. Within 2 weeks of the pandemic being declared, Airbnb lost 80% of its bookings. Not over a quarter, not over a month, in 2 weeks. Properties emptied overnight. Hosts who depended on income, teachers, nurses, retirees who rented a spare room, suddenly had nothing. And Airbnb had promised refunds it couldn't afford to pay. Brian made the hardest decision of his life. In May 2020, he laid off 1,800 employees, 25% of the company. He wrote each one a personal letter. In the letter he wrote, "I am truly sorry. I know this will impact you in ways that are far-reaching. Your livelihood, your sense of security, and your sense of belonging." He published it publicly. The travel industry was destroyed. No one knew when it would come back. Most people assumed Airbnb was finished. They had been planning an IPO. That seemed like a distant fantasy now. Then something unexpected happened. As the world locked down, people started booking Airbnb differently. Not city apartments, cabins, countryside, anywhere they could escape to. Domestic travel surged. By November 2020, just 8 months after the worst revenue collapse in company history, Airbnb filed for its IPO. The bankers expected a conservative valuation. They got $100 billion. The stock opened at $68. By the end of the first day, it was at $144. The company that was supposed to be finished was worth more than every major airline in America combined. Here is what most people miss about the Airbnb story. The idea wasn't the special part. Air mattresses in a living room is not a genius concept. What was special was the willingness to keep going when every signal said stop. 7 investors said no. The experts said it was dangerous. A global pandemic wiped out 80% of revenue in 2 weeks. Every time the story should have ended, it didn't, because Brian and Joe decided it wouldn't. 3 air mattresses, a maxed-out credit card, a cereal box, and the refusal to accept that the world had already decided what was possible. Every empire started with nothing. What are you building from zero?